Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, we are going to talk about how change after the honeymoon stage is harder for highly sensitive people, something I've noticed in my practice. And before that, please do subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was which women are okay with their husband having long work hours and work travel, and which women aren't. And if that has been an issue for you, then that is an episode that can change your life, or at least your perspective on that one issue. Okay, so obviously, I've talked about the honeymoon stage being a discrete biological stage. That is not a choice. I have an entire podcast called The Honeymoon Stage and Why There's No Bait and Switch, which I refer to fairly frequently because many men especially think that a woman's sex drive dropping off after the first few years is some sort of choice, and the more angry or, people with more of a trauma history that don't trust people think that this is some sort of a conscious bait and switch on the woman's part designed to entrap them when she really never had a sex drive all along. And as I discussed there, that is not true, and men act very differently in the honeymoon stage as well. I have an episode called Responsive Romance, which is the equivalent of responsive desire. Men, especially avoidant men, which are the more common type of insecurely attached man, act much more romantic in the honeymoon stage as well. And a lot of women think this is some sort of bait and switch if they have been traumatized and taught not to trust people, and it isn't. Everybody's just drunk on love. It's new relationship energy. It's literally like being drunk, and I talk about that then. So there are, though, people that feel the decrease of this like a ton of bricks, and people who feel less of it. Now, ironically, the people who feel less of a decrease tend to be more avoidant people because they didn't climb so high. They basically stay within a narrower band of emotion altogether. So even in the honeymoon stage, they were not as drunk on love as a highly sensitive person would be, and so, and also there's another reason that people would stay, which is that they are kept in that stage by constant uncertainty. You only move out of the honeymoon stage when you feel that there is certainty. You've been with somebody long enough that it's obvious you're going to be with them, or you've moved in together, or you've had a baby, or you got married. I mean, remember, if people stayed in the honeymoon stage forever, they would not take care of their offspring. They would not be able to focus on their jobs. They would not be good community members. And I discussed this about how marriage changes in midlife in that podcast. But if you are basically in this unrequited love situation and you're this fearful, avoidant, or preoccupied attachment person, then you can almost stay obsessed with your partner in perpetuity because they never fully you never get them. Your love is never fully requited. Now, a healthy, secure person in that situation, by the way, would get out. They'd be like, why am I with you when you don't ever act like you like me? But somebody, again, who has deeper dysfunction stemming from early family of origin experiences in which they never felt deserving of love, those people are going to stay trapped in those situations, trapping themselves in those situations, thinking that it makes sense and that it's normal to have to always be winning somebody's affection and never to be sure if it's requited, in perpetuity, right? But I'm not talking about that in this. I have a whole post on, when you stay in a limerent situation because your needs are never met or something. You could search on Dr. Psych Mom for limerent or limerence. I forget. But basically all other people, drop more after the honeymoon stage. Their romantic drive goes down and their sexual drive goes down. And even men who don't want to admit it, their drive goes down. Their refractory period expands, literally. And I talk about how porn, if you constantly use porn, then this is a whole podcast that I'm not going to get into here called Why Men Today Don't Realize That Sex Drive Drops After the Honeymoon Stage. They realize it after they get off of porn, though, unless they're on a, large amount of testosterone, in which case that keeps them artificially inflated as well, like an adolescent boy. But you can go back to that podcast for that. But for most people, your romantic and sexual energy drops after this early phase where you are biologically and evolutionarily programmed to bond and mate. And after that, you go back to being kind of a group creature. You turn to work and career and friends and hobbies. You still love the person. And I have a whole podcast called How do Happy Couples Act in the Post-Honeymoon Stage. That's obviously very relevant to this discussion. But for a highly sensitive person, and you can listen to all my stuff on highly sensitive people, right? They feel everything more deeply. So when their hormones change, they feel it like a ton of bricks. And then they are more likely to think that it's something that the partner did because it feels so dramatic. In reality, it just happens on the same timeline for everybody pretty much. Same as puberty happens on the same timeline, and menopause happens on the same timeline, and men start losing their hair on the same timeline and start having wet dreams on the same timeline. There are just certain biological amounts of time that are the same, kind of for everybody, Like if you're doing therapy, then I hope all you are, and if you want to, come to my practice, Best Life Behavioral Health. But the research shows that the majority of change happens in the first 6 months. Why? Because it's basically a honeymoon stage. Your momentum is high. Your ability and desire to absorb is higher. People habituate. This is why exposure therapy works, because people habituate to things. They habituate to people, relationships, therapy, everything, So the point is that when you are a highly sensitive person, you feel truly like you're out of your mind in the new love stage. You feel everything so deeply, so that hormonal shift, that increase in dopamine and oxytocin and adrenaline, it feels like transformative. Highly sensitive people are the ones who are the artists and the actors and all of the creatives. And these are the people who feel things so deeply. And so when you feel things that deeply and you feel this tremendous swelling of love that is all that you think about, and it's just like the movies, and this is how highly sensitive people feel in the honeymoon stage. Finally understand all the songs and all the movies about love, and this is amazing and wonderful, and they're just walking on air. Well, when they drop back down to earth, it seems like because they are so emotional and they did want to stay like in that stage for so long, it seems like it must have to do with the other person, just being kind of a dick or something, or it seems like maybe this isn't the right person after all, or it feels like maybe they're depressed, or it feels like maybe they need a new person or something. And it's so much like a ton of bricks that it almost feels like it can't be natural. Like there has to be some reason for it. And also, if you are a depressive person, then you can easily become a love addict. And I just had an episode on love addiction. Came out, now it'll be about over a month ago for you guys listening now. But if you're addicted to that new relationship energy because it's basically a way that you self-medicate your depression, then you go from honeymoon stage to honeymoon stage with new people. Because when it's like an antidepressant for real. It just makes you feel totally different. There's a novel, Acts of Desperation by Megan, I forget, but you could look it up, Acts of Desperation. And she describes very well, the author does, from the perspective of the protagonist, who's this young woman who's basically addicted to love, and it's a really good, Megan Nolan, I think. It's a good description of what it feels like to be in the honeymoon stage as a highly sensitive person. And so basically what you want to think about is, if this describes you and you were like floating on air in the honeymoon stage and now you're not, there's so much, to think about. First of all, how did you see relationships in your family of origin? If you saw your parents as fairly miserable with each other And now you thought you were protected against that initially because of how deeply in love you were. And now you fall into something where you can think about other things during the day and you do notice the flaws of the other person. And sex isn't like, a miracle every time. It's so exciting. Then, you may have some black and white thinking where you're like, oh my God, I'm going to end up in a marriage like my parents. And so subconsciously, like, you only have that as your template. You don't have like a healthy, like not addictive seeming love story. You just have this misery that you grew up with or the honeymoon stage. And so that's the people that really have to do deep work at what does it look like to be in a happy relationship that isn't being drunk on new love and that isn't dysfunctional like you, the way that you grew up. And a lot of people, this is when a lot of people come into couples work because they are trying to get into new routines and new rhythms. And also they're mourning the fact that if you are this highly sensitive person and you are always so emotional and everything you feel so deeply about everything and you did since you were a child. So think about it. So for example, you're a highly sensitive child and you feel everything super deeply. And then you start to get into like little, friendships and you feel those so deeply. Your best friend is like, it's you and her against the world. And, basically I'm talking about highly sensitive women who feel the most like this because again, men are protected from some of the decrease by higher levels of testosterone that keep their sex drive up. But I'll talk about men after this. And, women are also more often the preoccupied attachment partner. But anyway, so you have these great best friends and then you start having boyfriends and every one of those feels just magical, until it doesn't because, you get mad or he gets mad or he dumps you or you dump him. Nothing's long enough to get out of the honeymoon stage anyway, and then you meet the guy that you're going to marry and it's even better, than anything else. And then you stay with him longer, of course, because you get engaged and you get married. So you've been with him longer than anybody else and bam, you fall out of the honeymoon stage. Well, that could feel like really shitty because for your whole life, you were getting into honeymoon stages. And then this marriage also coincides with a lot of other stuff, like having babies. Like a lot of women keep having babies because you're in the honeymoon stage with every baby. You're in love with the baby. That is how we are designed to operate. The level of oxytocin, the bonding. You're basically in love with every baby. So it's a lot of grief for women when there's not going to be any more babies because that whole magical in love stage with the baby, you're not going to have anymore. And you certainly don't have it with your husband anymore, not the same way, of course, because you've known him already for X amount of years. So at this point, people who grew up in healthy families, they say, okay, we're not in the drunk on love stage, and now we're at the stage with deeper love and deeper connection. We're building a family. We're building our careers, a social life, a community presence, etc. The home we're working on, whatever. And they can move more fluidly into this stage. Yes, everybody grieves a little bit. It's not exactly like it used to be, but also it's better because now you have family. You have all of this shared experience, history. You're closer on a deep level. Your friendship grows. So it's not like you're racing into bathrooms at parties to have sex or reading each other poetry, but also you're like deeply bound and connected. And in fact, you can like almost laugh a little bit at the people you see in the honeymoon stage, like, oh, that's cute, versus like some sort of like envy. Now, the envy with men, I told you I was going to get back to men, manifests frequently for what the sex life was like during the honeymoon stage. And if a man is a late bloomer, then he can become obsessive with, I only had this for a little bit of time, and now I'm never going to have it again. She's never going to be drunk on new love. Because most men, and women are intelligent beings. And, if they're provided with enough evidence, like I have a lot of guys, they come in, they're like, well, shit, I learned about the honeymoon stage from your podcast. It totally makes sense. Now what? Now I'm in a grief stage, because now you convinced me that she's not bullshitting me and that this happens to everybody, but now what? So like, that's the only time in my life that I really enjoyed a regular fun sex life. And what, am I not going to have that anymore? And of course, by the way, people have great sex after the honeymoon stage. But does the woman act like she wants to rip their clothes off like she did in the first couple of months? No. She doesn't act like that unless she's drunk and they're on vacation and having fun in some kind of way. But that's not like going to become the core aspect of her work day like it was when they were first dating. It's just not. So, a lot of guys who, again, so it's very similar. If they saw a happy marriage and they are confident and they feel like they got experience in their life, sexual fun experience as a younger guy and in this relationship, then they're moving into a different stage. Because the reality is when they picture it, their mom probably wasn't ripping their dad's clothes off in the middle of a work day either, but yet they know that their parents had a good, intimate life. They kissed, they hugged, they disappeared into their bedroom, and they had a family and they were good people and they loved the children. So men in that situation can accommodate a change into the post-honeymoon deepening of the attachment, the bond, growing the family, etc. Whereas men that A, did not see a loving marriage that they want to recreate, and B, felt like late bloomers or insecure, feel much more grief, and they also tend to cheat more, by the way. And so do the women. If you don't resolve this, then it's more likely that you will cheat, because what does cheating give you? It's a honeymoon stage, And this isn't everybody. As I talk about so much, most people don't cheat. But there's a lot of ways, to kind of escape. And so getting into the porn, romance novels, it's basically like intimacy porn, as I call it, on social media, the couples that act like they're in the eternal honeymoon stage. I have a good podcast about that. Every night is like a sleepover when you marry your best friend. No, it's fucking not. That was like a quote from some bullshit, social media thing, and you should listen to that podcast. But anyway, point being, as always, if you didn't grow up in a happy home, everything's going to be harder. Therapy can help. That's like basically the TLDR of my entire podcast. But it is very possible to enjoy the deepening of your romantic connection, even as a highly sensitive person. And by the way, as a highly sensitive person, also, you can be more highly sensitive and attuned to the deepening of your connection and the closeness of your bond and the things you have now that aren't like the honeymoon stage. However, you have to kind of like literally talk yourself through it and be like, this is a biological stage. If I cannot accommodate this ending, I will never be in a happy long-term relationship. That these are literally in conflict with each other. This doesn't last forever no matter what. And maybe there are issues in the marriage that I have to resolve now that I didn't notice then. But I could do that from a place of, we both probably have things to work on now that we're not blinded by the honeymoon stage lust. And instead of saying, oh my God, it's just the end of my life and the end of this marriage because I feel so bad and I don't have the natural antidepressant of the honeymoon stage anymore and these rose-colored glasses that I loved so much, Anyway, I hope you guys found this interesting and something to reflect upon, and I will talk to y'all soon. Have a great day, guys.